Welcome back and thanks for tuning in. This is now video 11 for Just Make It, and today I am going to try a different form of joinery. I recently finished a project for a client and it required a bunch of 1/4 inch ply, and as you can see I have some of it left over. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put together some boxes, and because they're going to be made at 1/4 inch, they're way too thin to do the methods I've done so far, which are using dowels and of course screws and glue. So I am going to put them together using rabbet joints. Now, I've never done this before, so it'll be an interesting experiment to start off with. And the other neat thing about them, these aren't just going to be boxes, they're actually going to be dice trays. My son is setting up a channel and he's going to do some gaming on it. And of course, there's going to be a bunch of dice that are going to need to be rolled. So on one side, there's going to be a spot to store them. And on the other side, of course, is a section where you're going to roll the dice. So like I said, I haven't done this before. I don't think it's going to be too difficult, but we'll see how it looks. I'm hoping they look really nice because I suspect at some point, at least, they'll be on camera. And it would be nice if they look at least presentable. So this is actually really nice plywood. This is a 1/4 inch maple, and it has a nice inner side to it, which you get to see in a little bit. And hopefully that will turn out really nice in, well, once it is all oiled up. So all I'm doing here now, at the start of this video, is I am just cutting all the pieces to size. This is really quite straightforward, and it's just a simple matter of getting everything all prepped and ready for doing the first rabbet joint. Now, I didn't actually do my first couple of tests on these strips here because, well, I mean, I've never done them before, so I wanted to try out a couple different ways of doing it, get a feel for how deep the cuts are going to be, and well, basically setting it up so everything suits exactly the way I want it for when I actually do the real pieces. So it didn't actually take that long. Like I said, I cut a bunch of pieces, and I think it was just two little 1/4 inches about this size here left over. You can see a few of them there. There you go, right there. And that's what I practiced on. And like I said, it took about maybe 2 or 3 times to get it set up properly, and then again, it was no big deal, actually, really, to tell you the truth. It actually is a very simple way of doing this, and after now having done it, I think it's actually a really great way of making little boxes. So I may have other projects for it. So what I'm doing here is I'm setting up the distance from the stop to the blade at precisely, well, the thickness of the 1/4 inch plywood. And what I'm doing here is I'll do the first cut at that mark, and then as you can see, I'm incrementally moving the piece of plywood away from the blades so that the rest of it is all cut out as well. This is only 1/8 inch, so it doesn't really take that much. One thing I noticed, and what I've heard from watching other people do this, is the saw blade I have is not flat cut, so it does have a bit of a ridge to it. I wasn't too concerned about it because I thought maybe it would just give extra rigidity because the glue will actually get in there and have more to hang on to. We'll see how that all turns out. I mean, these are going to get used, so they'll get knocked around, and we'll see how long the joints last. I mean, dowels, as you can see there, they turned out pretty good. As dowels obviously are quite strong, and I've built a workstation out of it now and a bunch of drawers, and they're all holding together really well, and we'll see how these do. As you see here, it is just ever so slightly off as far as where the cut should have been. It should have been just a little bit more narrow. It's not a big deal because these don't have to be a specific size. They just have to turn out nice in the end. So that little extra that's off there can easily be sanded down. So I'm not too concerned about that. So now I had done some other cuts. I can't remember exactly what they were, but I had to reset the blade. Unfortunately, that means now that I'm going back to these, I have to reset the blade yet again, just to make sure it's at the right height here. And I'm just double checking to make sure I'm not, cutting off more or less than last time. I want to keep them all as uniform as possible. But the nice thing with setting up, I have the ones I've already done, so those are my guides. And now it's just a simple matter of running them through, finishing off all the pieces that are left over. Now, as I also mentioned, you'll see here in a second here, I'm going to put some center dividers in this as well, so I'm going to do that slightly differently. These are the bottoms, so all I'm doing here is just going around and doing exactly the same thing I did for all those little strip pieces, and doing that now to the two bottom pieces. As you may have guessed at this point, I'm making two of these boxes, or dice trays, and this is just a simple matter of trimming off enough of this so that it slides down inside. There you go. And this will give it a nice, once glued of course, it'll give it a nice rigidity. And like I said, this is really straightforward to do. If I were to make this out of acrylic, it would happen much faster, and the weld up will be obviously quite a bit quicker. If you've watched my other channel, you know how easy it is to make an acrylic box. But wood has a nicer sound when it comes to rolling dice in them, and it just, I think, looks much better for this kind of project. So there you go. They just fit snugly together like this. It's very, very straightforward to do. It actually didn't really take that much time, to be perfectly honest about it. So now I need to put on that center hole. This is a little bit different. I mean, obviously I'm not, as you can see here, I'm just basically just eyeballing it and deciding how far I want that piece to go. Decided on a certain number. As you can see here, it looks about 3 inches. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to run that first cut, and then that's very straightforward. And then, of course, I have to widen it out to allow the slot, or the slat, I should say, to fit into it. So that's the first cut. Now I just need to move it. Initially I just moved it 1/8 of an inch, and figured that should be relatively good enough. And then I'm double checking to make sure I'm cutting the right side here. And I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to do a test fit. And then it turned out to be just a little too snug at exactly 1/8, so I just moved it a tiny little increment and did the cut again. So it's very easy to do this. And these are obviously the long pieces that are going to go down the sides of the tray. And then it fits through really nicely. Just a little loose, which is excellent, because that will allow obviously room for the glue. And then these have to slide down. They're going to be put in after the rest of the box is put together. So I wanted to make sure I obviously had enough room for that. There we go. Just going to glue this up now. And years ago, when the kids were younger, they wanted to do some projects, so I went and bought a bunch of little bags of tiny paintbrushes, just so they can do small projects. And I still have a bunch of them kicking around, so I'm going to use that to smooth the glue out, make sure it gets into all those little nooks and crannies. I suppose it's not really necessary, but it does make it look, I think, a little bit better in the end, and also, of course, make sure everything's glued up properly. This is really straightforward. This is just a simple matter of making sure all the pieces have the glue on them, except, of course, that center slot that you see there. That will be done after the fact, and then it's just a simple matter of assembling it. This went together so easily. Now, I suspect the best way of doing this would be to... I actually just noticed there I almost put the wrong side out. The best thing would be to clamp this up in some format, but I'm just using masking tape. I don't have anywhere near enough clamps. That's actually one project I should probably get onto relatively soon, making some for projects like this. But the masking tape seemed to have done a good job, and it is obviously quite easy to do, and there's not really a whole lot of force necessary in this, I don't think. But then again, this is the first time I've been doing this, so the one thing I did a little bit differently here is I did put a piece of masking tape across the side here, and I put a little bit of force on it. You can see a bit of a deflection there, and that will hopefully hold the sides in together. And as it turns out, it did a pretty good job. So so far I should say it's holding together quite nicely. So that's one done. I'll do up the other one now, and then the next part, of course, is to drop in the slot, which is just a matter of gluing up the slot itself. I did this one a little differently, of course, because it's already put together. I just put the glue onto the brush and then brushed that into the slot, glued up the ends, and then slid them down. And then, of course, after that, I'm going to go through and wipe off all the extra glue, and then I did decide to clamp this up a little bit in a sort of way. I turned them upside down. I made sure that all the surfaces were clear of glue, and then wedged it between two sheets of plywood, and then of course put something heavy on top of it just to make sure the bottoms are snugly in place. There you go, that's one done. I'm going to do the next one here, and you see also putting a little bit more tape on it, making sure they're well covered in all the directions. And then it's a simple matter after this of just letting it dry. And in comparison to the dowel method, obviously can't do dowels here, but just in general for how long it takes to do this, it isn't that much longer. It is longer. It does take longer to do it this way than it does for the glues and screws because of the extra rabbet joints that you have to make. And again, not a big deal really, but this is obviously not something you can do with 1/4 inch, so I mean it's perfectly acceptable. So what I'm going to do here now is, as I said, put them, well, I cleaned the sheet off a little bit here. This is just a piece of rough plywood so I don't get my glue all over my workbench. I'm going to set them here side by side. I'm going to put another piece of plywood on top of that, and then I'm going to drop on my clamps, just 2 heavy toolboxes, and then let it set for 24 hours. And the next day, simply going to take this off, and then remove the plywood, and of course peel off all the tape, and so we're going to have a quick look, or at least a first look, at how they all turned out. Initially, when I first pulled out the tape, there is a few gaps, as you can see here a little bit, but the neat thing about it is it all sanded out really nicely. I didn't have to use any wood filler at all, which is at this point was kind of surprised me a little bit. I thought I might have to. As you can see, there's a bit of a gap there, but a little bit of sanding took care of all of that. And there you go, that's the dice tray basics. The left hand side is for where they're going to be stored, and the right side is where they get rolled. Now, I'm not going to show you all the sanding. I'm going to show you obviously the steps I did. I did use a sanding block, which is really quite nice, and I also used my belt sander to take off some of the rough stuff. And it is, I also put on a finer grit here as well, just to get off the little bits of glue and to sand the edges. I didn't want to use anything too harsh, like power sanding off the corners, because this is again 1/4 inch, so I wanted to make sure I didn't did obviously too much off. Now what I'm doing here is when I put the sandpaper on the block, there's a little strip that comes off, and that I decided I'd used for the inside edges, right down in the corners where it's really hard to reach, and I did all those by hand. So I'm just going to put on some boiled linseed oil here. I think it looks really nice on this, and I'm going to put, if I remember correctly, 3 coats. I'm not going to show you all that either. It is a lovely oil. I really like it. I use it an awful lot. And believe it or not, the thing I like most about it, besides, well, I mean, it looks nice, but I actually like the smell when it's on the wood, so that's part of the reason why I use this. And watch this. This is really nice. This the inner parts that I said that were a little bit different in this is obviously the less finish end for the plywood, but it really comes out really nicely with the oil. And that's pretty much the project. This is just going to finish this up, put a couple more coats on it, and I'm going to show you the final product. So thank you very much for watching. Definitely leave comments. Let me know what you think of this. This is my first time doing rabbet joints, as I said, and my first impressions are this is actually a nice way of doing things. It's not labor intensive, and the end product is quite lovely. And as you can see here, those joints turned out really quite nicely, like I said, for my first attempt. So there you go, 2 dice trays. A couple spots of glue I missed, but seeing how these are just going to have dice rolled in them and they're going to get banged around a little bit, that's perfectly fine. So thanks again. I'll see you in the next video, and bye for now.